What if I told you that the chaos consuming the Middle East today, the wars, the borders, the endless conflict, all of it traces back to a single railway that was never finished? A train line that powerful empires feared so much they tore an entire civilization apart to stop it. This is the story of how steel rails became weapons, how a business deal became a world war, and how the ghost of a German train still haunts us over a century later. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a map of the Middle East the same way again. Picture this. The year is 1903. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany stands in Constantinople, shaking hands with the Ottoman Sultan. They're about to sign a deal that will change the world forever. Not a treaty, not a military alliance, a railway contract. The Berlin to Baghdad Railway, a ribbon of steel stretching from the heart of Europe through the ancient lands of Mesopotamia all the way to the Persian Gulf. On paper, it's about trade, modernization, progress. But in the smoke-filled rooms of London, panic is setting in. Because the British Empire knows something the public doesn't. Whoever controls this railway will control the future. And they will do anything, destroy anything, to make sure that future belongs to them. What happened next wasn't just the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. It was the deliberate dismantling of an entire region, the drawing of borders designed not to create nations, but to stop a train. And the consequences of that decision are still killing people today. In the late 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was dying. Once the superpower that made Europe tremble, it had become the sick man of Europe, drowning in debt, losing wars, watching its territories slip away piece by piece. The sultans knew they needed to modernize fast or disappear completely. And modernization meant one thing: railways. Railways were the technology of power. They moved armies faster than horses, carried goods cheaper than camels, and connected distant provinces into unified markets. But there was a problem. The Ottomans were broke. They couldn't build the railways themselves, so they did what desperate empires always do. They invited in foreign capital. Enter Germany. Unlike Britain and France, who already had their claws in Ottoman territory through colonial treaties and trade monopolies, Germany was a latecomer to the imperial game. Kaiser Wilhelm II was ambitious, aggressive, and hungry for a place in the sun. He looked at the map and saw opportunity. A railway from Berlin to Baghdad would give Germany a land route to the Persian Gulf, bypassing the British-controlled Suez Canal entirely. It would open up markets in the Middle East, provide access to oil, and most dangerously of all, it would create a direct overland connection between the industrial powerhouse of Germany and the vast populations of Asia. The British immediately understood what this meant. For centuries, Britain's power rested on one principle: control the seas, control the world. The Royal Navy dominated the oceans. They could blockade any rival, protect their trade routes, and project power across the globe. But a railway? A railway didn't care about the British Navy. You can't blockade steel tracks. You can't sink a train. If Germany completed this railway, it would break the British stranglehold on global trade. It would create an alternative economic system that didn't depend on British ships or British permission. The railway project began with great fanfare. German engineers arrived in Ottoman lands with blueprints and ambition. They surveyed routes through mountains and deserts. They built stations and laid tracks. Ottoman elites celebrated.
This was their chance to modernize, to prove they could stand alongside the European powers as equals, not subjects. German capital poured in, German companies secured contracts, German influence grew, and in London the alarm bells were ringing louder every day. The British began their counterattack not with armies, but with money. They couldn't simply invade, not yet, so they deployed financial warfare. British banks offered the Ottomans loans at better rates than the Germans, but with conditions. Accept this loan and you must give Britain control over your customs revenues. Accept this investment and you must grant Britain veto power over other railway projects. It was a trap disguised as help. The Ottoman Empire, desperate for cash, kept taking the bait. With every loan, they surrendered more sovereignty. The debt spiraled out of control. Soon, European creditors controlled Ottoman finances completely. The empire was independent in name only. But the railway kept being built, slowly, expensively, but it kept moving forward. By 1914, significant portions were operational. Trains ran from Constantinople into Anatolia. Tracks stretched toward Aleppo and beyond. The gap was closing. And that's when everything exploded. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo lit the fuse, but the dynamite had been packed for years. The First World War wasn't just about Serbian nationalism or tangled alliances. At its core, it was about preventing Germany from breaking British naval supremacy, and the Ottoman Empire, tied to Germany through debt and the railway project, was dragged into the furnace. The Ottomans joined the Central Powers, and immediately the British moved to strangle them. They didn't invade Constantinople directly. Instead, they struck at the railway. British agents worked with Arab tribal leaders, promising them independence if they revolted against Ottoman rule. A British officer named Thomas Edward Lawrence, who would become famous as Lawrence of Arabia, led sabotage missions deep into the desert. His targets weren't fortresses or armies. They were railway bridges, tracks, and stations. Blow up the railway, and you cripple the Ottoman war machine. And it worked. The Ottoman forces were starving, running on empty. The railway that was supposed to save them remained unfinished. There were critical gaps in the tracks through the mountains. Supplies from Germany had to be unloaded, transported by truck or camel over treacherous passes, then reloaded onto trains on the other side. This logistical nightmare strangled the Ottoman war effort. If that railway had been completed just 5 years earlier, the entire war might have ended very differently. The inability to move troops and supplies efficiently allowed British forces to regroup, counterattack, and eventually capture Baghdad and Jerusalem. As the war ground on, the British and French governments met in secret to carve up the future. They didn't wait for victory. In 1916, a British diplomat named Mark Sykes and a French diplomat named François-Georges Picot sat down with a map and a pencil. They drew lines across the Middle East, lines that ignored tribal boundaries, religious divisions, and basic geography. But look closely at the Sykes-Picot agreement and you'll notice something chilling. The borders correspond almost perfectly to the proposed route of the Baghdad Railway and the known locations of oil deposits. Britain claimed southern Iraq and the port of Haifa in Palestine. France claimed Syria and Lebanon. They were carving up the carcass before the animal was even dead, ensuring that no single power could ever threaten their dominance again. The railway, meant to unite the region, became the knife that divided it. The betrayal was absolute. The Arabs had been promised independence if they fought the Ottomans. Lawrence had made those promises personally.
But when the war ended and the guns fell silent, the Arabs didn't get freedom. They got British and French colonial administrators. The Ottoman Empire was dissolved. The Sultan was deposed. The Caliphate, the ancient institution of Islamic leadership, was abolished. And the debt? The crushing, impossible debt? It wasn't forgiven.
It was merely restructured to be paid by the new nations carved out of the empire's corpse.
The British Empire had succeeded. They stopped the German threat. They secured the route to India. And most importantly, they seized control of the oil that would power the entire 20th century. The Berlin to Baghdad railway was cut into pieces, different sections now belonging to Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. It never functioned as the unified trade route it was designed to be. The dream of a Silk Road of steel died in the desert sand.
The destruction of the Ottoman Empire and the failure of the Baghdad Railway created a vacuum in the Middle East that we're still dealing with today. But the story didn't end in 1918. The ghost of that railway haunted the region throughout the 20th century, and it has returned with a vengeance in the 21st. After the First World War, the British and French controlled the Middle East, but they faced a new problem. They had the land and the oil, but they still needed to transport that oil to Europe. The Baghdad Railway, once their greatest fear, was now in their hands, but it was broken. The borders they had deliberately drawn created new obstacles. A train traveling from Baghdad to Europe now had to cross 3 different customs borders, deal with 3 different currencies, and navigate 3 different colonial bureaucracies. The economic unity of the region was shattered, and this was intentional. The colonial powers preferred a divided Middle East, weak and dependent, over a united one that could challenge them.
In the years following the war, the British focused on building pipelines instead of railways. Pipelines were easier to control. They didn't carry passengers or dangerous ideas, only oil. The Iraq Petroleum Company was formed, a consortium of British, French, and American oil giants. They constructed a pipeline from the oil fields of Kirkuk in Iraq to the Mediterranean coast.
This pipeline followed almost the exact same strategic logic as the old railway project, but this time the profits flowed exclusively westward. The people of the Middle East watched their wealth being pumped from their ground and sent away, while their own infrastructure remained primitive. The dream of modernization that the Ottoman sultans had envisioned was replaced by the brutal reality of extraction. But the strategic concept behind the Baghdad Railway never truly died. The idea of a land bridge connecting Europe and Asia is simply too powerful to ignore. During the Second World War, the railway became a focal point once again. Nazi Germany looked eastward. Hitler dreamed of accessing Iraqi oil and the resources of the Caucasus. German agents were dispatched to Iraq to stir rebellion against the British, promising to finish what the Kaiser had started. The British had to invade Iraq again to secure the oil fields and transport routes. History was repeating itself almost word for word. The locations of battles shifted slightly, but the prize remained identical. Control the corridor, control the world. After the Second World War, the British Empire collapsed under the weight of its own debts and exhaustion. The United States stepped in to fill the void, inheriting the British obsession with controlling the Middle East, but using different tools. Instead of direct colonial rule, they employed coups, puppet governments, and strategic alliances. But the fear remained the same, terror of a rival power dominating the Eurasian landmass. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union became the new threat. American strategists feared Soviet tanks pouring through the same mountain passes the Baghdad Railway once traversed. Turkey became a crucial NATO ally not because of democracy or shared values, but because it occupied the most valuable real estate in the world, the choke point between East and West.
Now fast forward to today. The parallels between the Baghdad Railway era and our current moment are striking. We have a new, rising industrial power challenging the dominant naval empire. China is building massive infrastructure projects across the Eurasian continent, high-speed rail lines, pipelines, highways connecting China to Europe and the Middle East overland. The Belt and Road Initiative looks remarkably similar to the old Baghdad Railway, but on a vastly larger scale.
It seeks to bypass maritime choke points controlled by American naval power. It aims to unite the economies of Asia, Europe, and the Middle East into a single trading bloc. And just like the British in the early 1900s, the Americans are deeply concerned. The accusations sound familiar. Debt traps, supporting dictators, security threats. The language has barely changed in over a century. The strategic anxiety is identical. The story of the Baghdad Railway teaches us that when a dominant empire feels threatened by infrastructure that could undermine its power, it will resist. It will deploy financial pressure, propaganda, sanctions, and if necessary, military force to prevent that connection from being made. The Middle East remains the chessboard where this game plays out. The conflicts in Iraq, Syria, the tensions with Iran, the instability in Turkey all occur along the same fault lines where those rails were laid over a century ago. It's not coincidence, it's geography.
The tragedy of the Ottoman Empire serves as a warning. The Ottomans thought they could play European powers against each other, take German money to build their country while maintaining independence. But when you invite a superpower to build your critical infrastructure, you're not just buying steel and concrete. You're importing their geopolitical rivals. You're painting a target on your land. The train that was supposed to bring prosperity brought armies that tore the empire to pieces.
Today, many developing nations face the same choice the Sultan faced. They desperately need development, infrastructure, bridges, power plants. They're caught in the middle of a struggle much bigger than themselves. The lesson is stark. Infrastructure is never neutral. A road is never just a road. It's a vector of power. And empires will burn the world before they let rivals control the flow of trade. When you watch the news and see chaos in the Middle East, you're often told it's about religion or ancient hatreds, a clash of civilizations. But dig down through the sand and the history, and you'll hit the rusted iron tracks of a German railway that was never finished. You'll find the remnants of a business deal that went catastrophically wrong. You'll discover that the borders of the Middle East weren't drawn to create viable nations. They were drawn to stop a train.
The world we inhabit, the wars we witness, even the prices we pay at the gas station, were all shaped by the failure of the Baghdad Railway. The train that never arrived is still destroying the world. Empires don't collapse the way people expect. They collapse in ways people ignore. If you recognize these patterns playing out somewhere today, you already know what comes next. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, it's rhyming louder than ever.
If you found this perspective valuable, leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you see these patterns elsewhere? What do you think happens next? And if you want to understand the forces shaping our world before they reshape your life, make sure you're subscribed, because those who pay attention are the only ones who learn what history tries to hide.